I was born in Selma, Alabama in 1936. I want to start there because that sentence means something specific. If you know American history, you already understand. If you don't, stay with me. My name is Harold James Johnson. I am 88 years old, and I have spent my entire life measuring the distance between what this country says it is and what it actually is. The notebook on that desk behind me, I've been keeping notes for 80 years. I am going to tell you something that happened in 1954 that took me 60 years to fully understand. I thought I understood it the day it happened. I was wrong. I was completely, entirely wrong. I grew up on Lapsley Street. My father James worked the foundry 6 days, 12 hours. He came home with hands like pieces of the road. My mother Ruth took in laundry. She pressed shirts for white families across town. She knew their names. They did not know hers. He never complained, not once in 40 years. He believed that complaining was for people who had given up. He had not given up. He just carried it, all of it, in those burned hands that held mine when I was small. I asked her once, I was maybe 8, why she went to their houses, and they didn't come to ours. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "That's how it is right now, Harold. Right now." She always said right now, not forever, right now. I was 5 the first time I understood how the world was arranged. A department store on Broad Street. I needed school shoes. The man behind the counter said, "I can sell to your boy, but he can't try them on in here." My mother said nothing. She bought the shoes. We walked home. They were too small. She went back alone. I didn't understand why, until years later. She didn't want me to see her face in that store a second time. This is what I want you to understand about growing up in that time, in that place. It wasn't just laws, it was the air. You didn't talk about it, you breathed it. Every day, you just breathed it. My father believed in education like some men believe in God. Absolute, no doubt. He said, "Harold, they can take your job, your house, everything you own. They cannot take what is inside your head." I heard this so many times I began to resent it. I understand it now. When I was 14, a boy named Emmett Till was murdered in Mississippi. He was 14 years old. The men who killed him were acquitted by an all-white jury in 67 minutes. Then they admitted to it in a magazine, knowing they couldn't be tried again. I want you to sit with that number. 67 minutes, less time than a movie. That's what they decided a 14-year-old boy was worth. I went to Tuskegee Institute in 1954. On the bus from Selma, I had to sit in the back. I knew every law, every ruling. I sat in the back and opened a book and read it. That was my protest in those years. I read, I learned. I prepared myself for a world that had not yet decided to let me in. I graduated with honors in 1958, applied to 23 companies, got 2 responses, 1 rejection, no explanation, 1 offer from a firm in Detroit. I found out 3 years later they'd been pressured by a black advocacy organization to hire qualified black engineers. I didn't know that when I accepted. I've thought about it many times since. The North was supposed to be different. No colored signs on the water fountains, no separate waiting rooms. But when I called about apartments, they were always taken. Then I'd drive past 2 weeks later and see the for rent sign still in the window. The law said one thing, the system said another. I became very good at reading systems. I met Gloria in 1960. She was a school teacher from Birmingham. She had a laugh that started in her whole body before it reached her face. First date I told her I was going to marry her. She said, "You're very confident for someone I just met." I said, "I've been trained to work with what I have." She laughed, that body-first laugh. I married her 8 months later. We tried to buy a house on Palmer Woods. The sellers decided not to move forward. We tried another. The financing fell through. A third, the sellers withdrew with no explanation. We moved into a black neighborhood on the east side. Fine neighborhood, doctors, teachers, mechanics, everybody working hard, everybody locked out of the same places. I want to say something about that neighborhood that gets lost. When people talk about segregation, they talk about what was taken. They don't always talk about what was built. Block parties, church suppers, old men playing chess on front porches. Was it what we chose? No. Did we make something extraordinary out of it? We did. People always do. Marcus was born in 1963, the same year as the March on Washington. Gloria and I watched it on television. 250,000 people on the mall. She was holding him. He was 3 months old. I thought, this boy will grow up in a different country than I did. I was right about that. I wasn't right about how different. 1967. Detroit. The uprising, or the riots, depending on which word you were taught. July 23rd on 12th Street. I will not pretend I didn't understand why. When you systematically exclude people from housing, employment, education, justice, you should not be surprised when the anger finds its own form. I felt grief, fury, and underneath all of it, a thin thread of recognition, not approval, recognition. There's a difference. I've spent my life holding on to that difference. I want to say something about progress, because people ask me about progress. Progress is real. I've seen real progress. But progress in this country, for people who look like me, has almost always required a lever, a lawsuit, a march, an investigation, a camera. Progress doesn't arrive because people decided to be good. It arrives because being good became the easier option. In 1972, I was passed over for a promotion. Man had fewer patents, fewer years, graduated after me. I went to my supervisor, laid out the documentation. I always kept documentation. He said, "Harold, it's not about qualifications." I said, "What is it about?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Martin Luther King was killed on April 4th, 1968. I was in Detroit. I sat in my living room with Gloria for a long time and said nothing. Marcus was 5. He was asleep. I didn't wake him. I sat there and I thought, the country has made its decision again. The decision is, we will take from you the thing you were building and see how you respond to that. I took Marcus to college in 1981. University of Michigan. Engineering. I helped him move in, shook his hand in the parking lot the way my father had shaken mine. Then I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes before I could drive away. Gloria asked me later why so long. I said, I was just making sure he got inside. She knew what I meant. He walked through doors that had been closed to me. That is what progress looks like from the inside. It is quiet. It is incremental. It is your children going places you were not allowed to go, and it is standing in the parking lot, watching them go in, feeling two things at once. Pride so large it is almost physical, and a grief you cannot name for everything that should have been different before they were born. Gloria died in 2016. We had been married 55 years. She died in February, and the world was already strange that year, and it got stranger after. I sat in our house, and I watched the news, and I felt something I'd been feeling my whole life, but couldn't name until that year. The gap. The gap between what this country says it is and what it actually is. I've been measuring that gap my whole life. In 2016, it felt like it had grown. People ask me, is it better? And I say, yes, better. I know this to be true. I have lived both. But better is not the same as good. Better is not the same as done. Better is what you build on, not what you settle for. Every generation thinks the progress they inherited is the finish line. It never is. The Notebook. I want to tell you about the Notebook. I started keeping it in 1955, the year after Brown versus Board. I was 19. I wrote down what I saw happening, what changed, what didn't change, what was promised, what was delivered. 4 notebooks now, 88 years. Some years are barely a page. 1963 is the longest by some distance. My great-granddaughter Ella is 7. She goes to a school where her class has children of 6 different backgrounds. She does not know yet that this was not always possible. She will learn. I will be the one to tell her, not to burden her, but because she needs to know the distance traveled, so she understands what it cost, and what it could cost again if no one is paying attention. She asked me last year why I kept a notebook on my desk. I told her I've been keeping notes my whole life. She asked what kind. I said, notes about what I saw happening. She thought about it. Then she said, like a reporter? I said, something like that. She said, are you writing about me? I said, I'm writing about everything. She seemed satisfied with that. Now, the thing I mentioned at the beginning, 1954. What happened? And why it took me 60 years to understand it correctly. I told you I graduated high school in 1954, the same year as Brown v. Board of Education. The Supreme Court ruled separate schools unconstitutional. I remember my father at the radio when the decision came through. He sat very still. He did not cheer. He said, Harold, things are going to get harder before they get better. I thought he was being pessimistic. In Selma, nothing changed after Brown. The schools stayed separate. The water fountains stayed separate. The waiting rooms stayed separate. For years, I thought my father meant, be patient, it'll come. He didn't mean that. I understood what he actually meant in 2014, when I was 78 years old, when I watched the news from Ferguson, Missouri, and I recognized the air, the same air I breathed in 1954, the same air, still there. I want to say something to the young people watching this. Something hard to say and harder to hear. The world is better than it was. I know this to be true. But better is not done. And the people who want to go back, they are real, they are organized, and they have been waiting. Ella is 7 years old, and I am still keeping notes. My father said, things are going to get harder before they get better. He was right about the harder. He was right about the better. What he didn't say, what I think he knew but didn't say, is that the harder and the better are not a sequence. They happen at the same time. They have always happened at the same time. You just have to decide which one you're going to keep your eyes on. The notebook is still on my desk. I am 88 years old. I was born in Selma, Alabama in 1936, and I am still taking notes. Because somebody has to. Because that is how you measure the distance. Because Ella is going to need to know. And because, this is the thing I believe, at 88 after everything, because it is possible to build something worth the cost of building it. I still believe that. The notebook is open. I'm still writing.